Thank you very much for inviting me, and congratulations to the LDP for its wonderful success, and to David. I'm sure he'll be a representative that we'll all be proud of. I noticed that the Liberal Democrats, when under their umbrella of welfare, will modify the welfare system to foster a culture of independence. Oh, thank you very much, I'm a shorty. Independence and civil society without neglecting the genuinely needy. When David asked me to speak, he wanted me to briefly outline what's wrong with the disability system. Well, he may as well have asked me how long's a piece of string. But isn't it amazing that over the last 12 months, the issues relating to disability have been on the front pages of national and major metropolitan and regional newspapers, and talked about on many and varied political programs and by many and varied political commentators. And everybody agrees that a national disability insurance scheme is a big idea whose time has come. It's only taken 50 years. The system of disability service and support for the most needy in our society, you know, those people in society whom the LDP knows are genuinely unable to provide for themselves, that system is dysfunctional, chaotic, chronically underfunded, clapped out and broken. And it runs on a perverse lottery based on where you live, how you acquired your disability and the kind of disability you have. But worst of all, the punishment is in the process of trying to access the services, and the punishment is a system designed to make mendicants of people with disabilities and their families by eroding their independence, their self-reliance and their self-respect. No one wants to beg. It destroys you utterly to beg, but that's exactly what so many parents and families and people with disabilities themselves have had to do to get the modicum of support that will help them live a life with a shred of dignity. Admittedly, since the year of the disabled person, things have changed somewhat, but the change has been grudging, graceless and glacial. In every area of public policy, children and adults with disabilities and their families really are the forgotten Australians. I wonder if there's an apology in that. Whether it's education, dental care, health care, transport, access to the built environment or access to employment, to just name a few. If you don't have personal care, you can't go to work. If you don't have transport, you can't get to work. And if the workplace isn't accessible, you can't work. When I say the process is the punishment, it really is. Well, isn't the National Disability Insurance Scheme supposed to change all that? Well, it might, but at the moment it's on a rollout. It's being trialled in about 4 different places here in Australia, and for a transformative scheme as such as it is, the early results are pretty patchy, and there are some people, of course, who are delighted, and others who are disappointed, and many who can't make head nor tail of the whole thing. In the meantime, the bulk of those people with disabilities and the families who are not in the scheme yet will still be dealing with the naysayers and the gatekeepers of 8 state and territory bureaucracies. And of course, the tyranny of bureaucracy is the tyranny of form filling. Just about 3 months ago, I had to fill out some forms. They ran to 87 pages. 87 pages, and then that didn't include the forms that the GP for my son had to fill out as well. So you can see that the single point at one level of government entry, which the NDIS promises, is very advantageous and so attractive. But not only would the bulk of people with disabilities and their families have to commence or continue with this chaos, they will in fact be in a catch-44, because it's twice as bad as catch-22, because they'll be dealing with a system that's actually shutting down. The state systems and the territory systems are shutting down. So there's panic in the ranks. The NDIS is coming is akin to the sky is falling. And as we speak, disability sector public servants are scrambling to find some niche employment in the non-government sector. Because, and the LDP and others will be very pleased, that the NDIS will be a consumer-driven and therefore market-driven scheme. It'll be the private sector which will be the primary provider of services and support. Already in New South Wales there's been legislation passed preparing for the transition, and heaven knows what that'll bring. Will that mean that all the houses that they own where people with disabilities live, will they be sold off, or will they be given over to the disability service providers, and who knows what they will do? Sell them off perhaps? We believe that such housing should be handed over to the government community housing and quarantined specifically for the use of people with disabilities who require supported accommodation housing. Otherwise, they'll be paying it out of the packages that they receive as rent. The NDIS isn't and won't be the panacea that so many people think it'll be. While it's a welcome scheme, it must be part of a suite of reforms which recognise that some people will want to remain independent. There are some families of children and adults with disabilities and adults with disabilities themselves who will not want to surrender their independence, who will eschew the process in order to take responsibility for themselves, to help themselves, which of course is straight out of the LDP playbook. That's why I hope the LDP will support Carers Alliance in our call for disability reform to include tax deductibility for disability-specific expenses for people with disabilities who have significant disabilities as a key plank of the disability reform platform. You know it makes sense. The core of the NDIS scheme is to provide individualised, personalised, customised and therefore flexible service and support for children and adults with significant disabilities. That's the key word, significant. The scheme makes the person at the centre of consideration. And it's meant to give those people voice, choice and control over the what, how, where, when and by whom disability service and support will be delivered. Now that sounds really tickety-boo, doesn't it? That's it then, all done and dusted. What's next? World peace? Well, there are a number of really important things that affect precisely the what, where, when, how and by whom the disability service support will be provided. There are a number of things about the NDIS which is unknown and unquantified, and the first of that is the National Assessment Tool, the tool that assesses the significance of the disability for the person to participate in the scheme. For all intents and purposes, that assessment tool remains a state secret and has not been released to the public. I don't know if a call to Putin, who might ask Edward Balls of Steel Snowden, might shed a little bit more light. Another unknown, look, you know, if you don't know what the criteria is and how the things are going to be assessed, how are you then going to appeal what you don't know about? Another unknown is the actual cost of care against the projected cost of care. And that's why the West Australian government hasn't come on board, and that's why they've resisted the NDIS, because they know the actual cost of care exceeds the projected cost of care. Then there is the chronology trap. There are people who have championed and advocated and fully supported the NDIS who will be victims of chronology, because while they might be eligible today, in 4 years' time they'll be over 65 and therefore ineligible. There's been no consideration of that, and while there is aged care for over 65, it's not geared to disability and the discrete needs of people who are not disabled by the fact of turning 65. People with disabilities who are not affected by frailty, dementia and other age-related conditions, but are disabled by their long-term, oftentimes lifelong disability. Furthermore, and contrary to the recommendations of the Productivity Commission, the NDIS does not do a carer assessment. In other words, there is no consideration of the capacity or the ability to provide or continue to provide the informal care that is reasonably expected for a family to provide. What's reasonable? 24/7? Let's remember the NDIS relies on families to continue to provide the informal care and support. Yet there appears to be no acknowledgement or policy that considers the physical, financial, psychological and emotional impacts on families. Without a carer assessment, there can be no contingencies in place to fill the gap should the carer family, for whatever reason, death perhaps, for whatever reason, to continue to provide the support that is needed to someone with a significant disability. That means, in policy development, the critical linchpin, the part that the carer family plays, has been totally ignored and yet relied upon. It's a serious flaw because many of the tens of thousands of those people doing that informal care are parents like my friend Marie Buckwalter here with her son Alex. They are parents in their late 60s, 70s and 80s. So we're in the dark here. Service providers, thank you, service providers, people with disabilities and parents and families are not aware of these fundamental flaws. And also the fact that there has been virtually not one brass razoo spent to inform them, to educate them, to familiarise them, and to inform the parents and families and people with disabilities themselves how this transformational scheme will operate, how to apply, how to participate, or how the scheme will work. You can't make it work for you if you don't know how it works. The other matter I'll allude to, just in passing, is the matter of guardianship and the possibility, well actually no, not the possibility, the inevitability of conflict with bureaucrats and service providers when families and people with disabilities themselves object to certain practices, policies and programs because the natural authority of parents and families have been totally eroded and denied. It's an overly bureaucratic scheme, no matter the fact that it's welcome and all the rest of it. And bureaucracy, being the enemy of flexibility, means that the NDIS is essentially reactionary. That's because it's skewed towards what the original disability advocate John Rorty called dominating, paternalistic, overprotective authority, where the person with significant disability and their families are denied the choice, voice and control this transformative scheme purports to provide. So again, what are we going to see? People with disabilities as captives of care,